I don't think there is. Or if there is, I think that it's actually slightly foolish to name it, to try and identify it, because it will only become limited, and it's just a way of corralling some words when it works out. And I don't think...
I actually think there is. It is. It's also evolving. I mean, it goes from analog to digital. It is just a progression that by now we do things digitally because it is faster and cheaper and easier. But every medium carries its own aesthetic and its own code. And digital couldn't be any different. See, there is always, like in painting, there are painters who paint, and there are painters who pay attention to the paint itself, the pigments, the canvas. And you talk about any field of art, and you find this phenomena.
So to suppose some moment at which the aesthetic became the digital aesthetic is to kind of propose a rather graphic notion of change.
And it's just a way of either corralling some works within it and other works out. And I don't think, on the whole, that most artists, and nearly everybody,
projection, aspiration about a given work, it doesn't really matter to me whether it's digital. It happens to be digital, and when it's interesting for me, when I start to see the digits, then I want to expand. I'm not interested in, well, I can't say that I'm not interested in artifacts, but I'm not interested in seeing the digitalization of the image.
The aesthetic of code always, for me, affects the aesthetic of the final image. So the landscape room prints, on the one hand, look like somewhat like paintings or photographs of idealized English landscapes, but at the same time we see these wire-lined trees, and that's unnerving, and we're reminded of the code, and the sort of digital aesthetic and the mathematics and the geometry are sort of fused, I think, in the experience of looking at the image.
Code you can operate on, you could multiply, you could complement, you could build out into a language. The language could be part of a family of other languages. So this virus-like character that propagates continuously in a code format. And I'm now in cyberspace, in this beast that eats everything. Every piece of information becomes totally useless, totally minuscule, you know. It becomes difficult to define as a gestalt or as any. But it's the true medium in which code dominates completely.
Done before. So I think there is a digital aesthetic, and I think that it's multi-dimensional. It's there with when you I'm sitting on the DLR, the little railway in London. Somebody sitting, the train stopped, and they're on their mobile phone. They're already talking to the person who's waiting for them at their destination. They're stuck in some kind of traffic jam. So the physical world is impinging on their desire to be somewhere else. The technology has already enabled them to get there at some level, and I think all those sorts of things. You know, that's a mundane, everyday example. You know, sitting in traffic with your mobile on or whatever. Yeah, it's doing funny things to the relationship between time and space for the physical body.
It's a way for us as the artist, and I think for the people who are looking at it, to have a language by which to understand the world. Now, the world is changing all the time as a result of our technologies and social situations and so on. And in order to be able to understand that world, I think we need new conceptual tools. And one of those conceptual tools is the aesthetic experience, or the art experience.
I think the principal consequence of the digital is the way in which separate human communicative modalities of speech, literacy, image making, the sonic in forms of music, have now, in a way through digital media, become interchangeable, fused, and I think this fact certainly gives rise to new forms, and in a way puts a question mark, or at least blurs the boundaries between discourses, because all these separate modalities represent a discourse, you know, whether it be literature or whether it be the visual arts. But once those boundaries dissolve, it makes qualitative evaluation much more difficult, much more problematic. So perhaps embedded in the term aesthetic is the ability to make judgments of quality. So in that sense, perhaps what has emerged is an anti-aesthetic.